One ECOSOC side event. We are the main subject of this event is preventing and responding to gender-based violence in humanitarian context. We are here today with you. I'm Hala Mahfouz. I'll be the moderator. My name is Hala, and I live in Jordan. I am an activist in disability rights. I would like to welcome you, all of you, and to start today's event. Please, if you have any note, don't be ashamed or anything to write it in the chat box. As we know, all COVID-19 has exposed the global pandemic of gender-based violence, and we can see a high number of statistics all around the world for this, which has been further exacerbated by the many challenges and experience around the world during COVID. So we released this event focusing on the gender-based violence in the light of COVID-19. And on behalf of CARE, UNICEF, UNFPA, OCHA, DRCI NGO Forum, African Women and Youth for Development and Save the Children, I welcome you and responding to gender-based violence in humanitarian context. This event was organized in the margins of the ECOSOC has 2020-21, which this year is on the theme, the strengthening humanitarian assistance to face the challenges of 1921 and beyond, mobilizing respect for international humanitarian law, inclusion, gender innovation, and partnerships. Thanks to the organizers, and a big thank as well to Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, the DJ ECO of the European Union of Norway in Geneva and Plan International for their co-sponsorship and support to this important event, preventing and responding to gender-based violence in humanitarian context. It is also important to note that the event today is taking place 2 days after we marked on 19 June, the International Day of the Elimination of Sexual Violence. Important that we eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. I have a few general features of this virtual side event. For everyone who's watching or joining us virtually, please note that this session is being recorded and its recording will be available afterwards. Sign language interpreters is available on the screen for interruption, and we have 3 languages, like we're speaking in English mainly, and we have French speakers. We have also interpretation in French, Spanish, and Arabic. You can find it by clicking on the side button of your screen. If you have any problem accessing the interpretation, please indicate in the chat so we can help you. And we can find also the raise hand button on the right side on the screen, also the QA and chat box. Today, we'll have an opening segment, panel discussion, question and answers, and closing remarks. We look forward to your active participation during the Q&A. Please submit your question of the here on the Q&A box at the bottom of the page. Now we will begin with a video looking at some of the work since the Oslo Conference on Ending GBV in Crisis in 2019. This 2 years ago, the humanitarian community met in Oslo for this conference. So we can watch it together now.
The horrors of gender-based violence, including sexual violence, affects millions every day around the world.
Humanitarian agencies have a duty to confront these atrocities. That's something we all have to do.
The voices of women and girls at risk often go unheard. yet they should inform everything we do.
SGVB affects at least 1 in 3 women and girls and many men and boys. The risks are greater in crisis, conflict, and detention.
The social, psychological, and economic impacts are long-lasting and have been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yet only 5% of the financial needs have been met so far this year.
2 years ago, the humanitarian community, including governments, women's rights activists, and survivors, united in Oslo.
We all committed to eliminate sexual and gender-based violence in the humanitarian crisis.
We'd like to mention that 2 years ago, the humanitarian community met in Oslo for the Conference of Ending Sexual and Gender-Based Violence and Humanitarian Crisis. And the video that we watched, it's produced by the organizers of the conference to look at what has been achieved over the last 2 years, but also what remains to be done. It's great to see this. A lot of work has been done since the conference in 2019, despite the pandemic, and look forward to hearing from our speakers what more they are committed to doing following the pandemic. So now I'm now pleased to introduce Ms. Lotte Mattsson, State of Secretary for Development Policy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark.
Thank you so much, and dear all, I hope you hear me relatively clear, and in spite of this being over Zoom. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to be with you here today, and let me thank the organizers for taking the initiative to gather us all, and to thank you for the opportunity to open this important event. We are here to take stock and discuss how we can improve our work to prevent and respond to gender-based violence in humanitarian context. And as you know, Denmark has just taken up the leadership of the Global Call to Action initiative as of January 2021, something that we take very seriously indeed. It is a coalition of 90 partners, as you know, national states, donors, international organizations, NGOs, and so forth. And hence, Call to Action has a really unique and a very strong voice in humanitarian action, and we must use that voice. It is needed indeed, both in terms of global political advocacy and in terms of concrete action on the ground. Sexual and gender-based violence is both a health, human rights, and a protection issue, as you all very well know. It must be a key priority in all our humanitarian response plans. The sad reality is that physical and sexual, psychological, and economic forms of sexual and gender-based violence is increasing massively in humanitarian emergency. It destroys lives, it tears apart families and community, and it creates rifts between neighbors. And those who are targeted are often discriminated against due to their age or political affiliation, ethnicity, religion, sexual or other minority status. And the impacts of COVID-19 has only added yet another layer of suffering to the complex. As Call to Action partners, we recently affirmed our commitment to an updated 2021-2025 roadmap. As global lead, Denmark will focus on implementation that is both robust and implementable. We will strive to push the agenda at the highest political level as well as on the ground. We will do so to empower and protect women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence and deliver assistance to the survivors. To that end, education, access to basic health services, and legal assistance are key.
To get the sun out of my face.
It is simple. Our efforts, it only has value if it's relevant and can be used in the local or national context. And as a global lead, Denmark is committed to ensure that the inclusion of women, of girls, and that women and girls are also included in humanitarian planning and in decision making. Their voices must be heard. They are too often neglected, and we must change that. And therefore, we'll try to lead by example by prioritizing real partnerships with local women and youth-led organizations in close cooperation with many of you as strategic partners. Towards the end, and this is the final point, let me just highlight the importance of mental health and psychosocial support. More focus must be given to address the psychological consequences of shame, self-blame, loss of trust, and feelings of safety. These issues are fundamental for the healing process of any survivor of sexual and gender-based violence across the world. Before I stop, let me give a particular thank you to those of you who work in the field, who are out there to make the translation of all our very fine words into action that actually do make a difference for those who are affected every day by gender-based and sexual violence. You make, as I said, real change, and we look forward to be working with you as we move ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lotte, and we would like to mention that Denmark is currently the chair of the Global Call to Action Protection from Gender-Based Violence and Emergencies, a multi-stakeholder initiative launched in 2013 to fundamentally transform the way that gender-based violence is addressed in humanitarian emergencies. We heard from Ms. Lotte Machin regarding Denmark's role of this call to action, and we would like to mention that actions always speak louder than words, and we love the thing we heard about the ideas, especially focusing on psychosocial support and focusing the girls in this areas the way that they need to be supported. Thank you a lot, Ms. Lotte. And we would like to introduce another video. Actually, it's a video, a short video statement by Ms. Henriette for UNICEF Executive Director on the role of her organization to prevent and respond to GBV humanitarian context.
On behalf of everyone at UNICEF, our thanks to the organizers of this important event, and especially the grassroots women and girl-led organizations who have joined us. They are on the front lines of preventing and responding to gender-based violence. Together, we have an opportunity to shine a light on an issue that is too often overlooked: gender-based violence in emergencies. In any crisis, girls and women are especially vulnerable to violence, abuse, and exploitation, but reaching them with the support they need is enormously difficult. So many of them end up suffering in silence. As a global humanitarian system, we can improve the reach and the results of our interventions. But turning words into action means focusing on 3 key areas of collective work. First, we need to make the invisible visible across our plans and priorities. At UNICEF, 98% of our humanitarian action for children appeals this year have an indicator for gender-based violence. And GBV risk mitigation is a cornerstone of all of our humanitarian response plans. We call on all of our partners to do the same, to give this issue the profile that it deserves. And second, we need to follow the lead of true experts, local women and girls organizations who are on the front lines. UNICEF recently launched a report with Voice entitled We Must Do Better. The report highlights how the humanitarian system is still falling short when it comes to supporting women and girl-led organizations. And that is why UNICEF has established a task force to increase the number and quality of our partnerships with these groups, both within UNICEF and with our partners. And third, across all of our work, more funding is needed. Only a fraction of the funding asks for GBV are met each year, usually at a much lower rate than for each overall humanitarian plan. UNICEF calls for GBV to be funded proportionately, with every dollar towards a multi-sectoral appeal being matched by an equal amount for our gender-based violence appeals. We believe the political will is there, and imagine how much difference this could make in our work for girls and women. At UNICEF, we look forward to continuing to work with all of you to put girls and women at the center of humanitarian responses and funding appeals, and to end gender-based violence in emergencies.
Thanks to Ms. Four and to UNICEF for this message and for your commitment to women's voice and leadership. So I would like now we are going to have another short video, a statement by Ms. Natalie Kanem, UNFP Executive Director on the role of UNFPA to prevent and respond to GBV in humanitarian context.
Distinguished participants, I'm pleased to join you today as we work together to prevent and to respond to gender-based violence in humanitarian crises. Here are the 3 points I thought important to share. First, let's acknowledge that progress is being made. Yet, it's not enough. A situation that is hampered by the continuing lack of dedicated resources and support. Funding for the gender-based violence sector this year currently stands at only 7% of the ask, and we're nearly halfway through the year. To conquer this big gap, we need to think bigger and build upon the tremendous goodwill, awareness, and the progress that we've made so far, and take this life-saving work to the next level in every community in every part of the world. Second, the blaming and shaming of survivors must end now. Shame and stigma still wrongly rest with the victims and survivors, while too often perpetrators walk free. The real blame for violence against women and girls belongs to those who are violating human rights with impunity. Justice and accountability must be brought to bear. This is the survivors' demand. On the path to the year 2030, I call upon all stakeholders to shift our mindsets and make accountability real as we pave the way for justice, healing, empowerment, and recovery. And finally, let us dig deep with communities to tackle root causes. Breaking down gender inequality involves persistent work at the grassroots level, especially work led by local women's groups. They understand the terrain best and are willing to act for change for the good of all. Such local women's groups need dedicated funding to support survivor-centered services, and they are well placed to engage men and boys and local leadership to find the best solutions. Indeed, the voices and leadership of women must be at the heart of all we do. I saw this firsthand this year in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I met with incredibly brave survivors who told me they want a greater voice in decision-making related to their safety and protection. UNFPA and our partners are working towards exactly that. Together, let us drive forward a localization agenda for ending gender-based violence that is lasting and gender transformative. And let us lead with evidence and data, accompanied by determination, passion, and perseverance as we rally together to put a decisive end to sexual and gender-based violence by 2030, once and for all. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Kanem and to UNFPA for your work leading the GBV sector. Many thanks to Ms. Lotte Mashun and to Ms. Henriette Forde and Ms. Natalie Kanem for these inspiring opening remarks focusing on raising the women and girls' voices. We have now come to the end of our opening segment, and it's now time to begin our panel discussion with our esteemed panelists, including a focus on efforts to combat GBV in the DRC. It is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Ms. Monica Ferro, Director of the Geneva Office for UNFPA. Ms. Monica, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, Hala.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So now I'll ask you a question. Monica, can you tell us what are currently the main gaps and weaknesses in addressing GBV in humanitarian crisis? What progress has been made?
Thank you so much, Hala. Thank you for having me, and thank you for a very thought-provocative question. And if you allow me, I would like to stress the importance of the Oslo conference and with the leadership of Norway in building momentum to end GBV, the video that we saw in the beginning, and also the ongoing coalition of partners in the call to action to end GBV in emergencies as critical in keeping the momentum in this life-saving work. I want also to thank Denmark as the current lead of the call to action, and Canada's leadership from last year, and of course all governments and partners that support GBV prevention and response. And of course, thank you to Save the Children for organizing this panel today. And I'm going to start with a very positive tone. We know what to do. And actually the field of responding to survivors and women and girls at the risk of GBV in emergencies has come a long way. The humanitarian community is thrilled to benefit from a comprehensive package of resources, including the minimum standards for GBV programming, the coordination handbook, and other tools such as the GBV case management guidelines. It's critical to take advantage of this benchmark and build on a momentum. And while we are in an unprecedented time of clearly defined programming and coordination standards, there are still gaps and challenges that we urgently need to address. And we need increased space for the influence and engagement of local actors, including women-led organizations. And that would be my first point. While 39% of UNFPA's humanitarian work in GBV, the funding in GBV, went to local or national partners in 2020, we all can do better. And looking ahead, UNFPA will track the amount that goes to women-led organizations. And why? Because it's critical. And we really need to reset the mindset regarding giving special attention to women-led organizations as partners for a better and more sustainable response. UNFPA is the GBV AOR leads. We lead on GBV coordination, often in coordination with partners, national and international NGOs, and across all regions, and partners such as the Yemen's Women's Union, but also government co-leads are critical to serving women and girls in humanitarian settings. Another thing that we need to do better and in a more concerted way is to coordinate efforts to improve mental health and psychosocial support for GBV survivors during COVID and beyond. It's critical that women and girls get access to quality psychosocial support focused on healing, empowerment, and recovery. And this is why we are launching a Time to Heal campaign to further advance this critical work with partners. I would like also to add that we, UNFPA, we promote the safety, healing, and recovery of women and girls through critical psychosocial support, and that ranges from psychological first aid and opportunities for rebuilding support networks to comprehensive case management and group support interventions by specialized GBV workers. And we will never be able to fill the gaps, as you were asking, Ala, without funding. And despite the rise of GBV during COVID-19, there hasn't been a match, an increased match in funding. As Natalia Cannon, our executive director, just mentioned, the humanitarian financial tracking system reports that 7% of the GBV asked to date is filled, only 7%. We know we can do better for women and girls.
Thank you for this rich answer. And maybe I can ensure your efforts here in Jordan in including and engaging women-led organizations as a girl with disability, and been working with a women-led organizations program here in UNFPA in Jordan, and also focusing on empowering youth and youth girls to be aware how to action if there's any incidents on GBV. And I have another question. How can GBV be better prioritized in humanitarian settings? What and who needs to be prioritized for prevention and response for this?
Well, let me three points, three critical points on that. First, we need all to recognize that specialized services for GBV survivors in emergency are life-saving, and they should be established from the onset of an emergency. Second, we need to recognize that we all have a role to play. Our collective accountability is to ensure access to survivor-centered services and information. And third, UNFPA will, through our leadership in the gender-based violence area of responsibility, we will continue to provide cutting-edge guidance to humanitarian gender-based violence community. And through our coordination, we will prioritize gaps and services and avoid duplication. There is good evidence on how to build, there's good evidence to build on regarding consultation with women's groups and GBV planning. We are grateful to that support to women and girls through actions to address gender-based violence, promote reproductive health, and empower women was one of the 4 strategic tiers emphasized by the outgoing emergency relief coordinator, and also as part of the UNFPA Interagency Steering Committee on PSEA Championship this year. We are increasing access for sexual exploitation and abuse survivors to GBV life-saving strategies. Collective action to prevent GBV also means preventing sexual exploitation and abuse and ensuring sustainability in care for sexual exploitation and abuse survivors means investing in and building on GBV coordinated services first. And we will remain committed to holding each other accountable by implementing our own commitments against the new call to action roadmap. Thank you, Ala.
Thank you, Ms. Ferro, and I'm sure we'll have lots more questions for you during the Q&A. Stay with us. Thank you. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Eva Sevezinica, the Senior Advisor on Humanitarian Advocacy of Save the Children Norway. Ms. Eva.
Hello, can you hear me well? Thank you for this important invitation.
Yes.
And you prepared 2 questions for me, right?
Yeah. Can you tell us about some of the main trends regarding sexual violence against children in conflict?
Exactly. You know, sexual violence is probably the most underreported grave violation against children in conflict. And even in peaceful settings, approximately 80% of sexual assaults go unreported. But in conflict settings, there are so many additional challenges. So we know that the reported and verified cases of sexual violence against children in conflict are just a tip. So recently in Save the Children, we published a new report called Weapon of War, Sexual Violence Against Children in Conflict, to show a bigger part of this iceberg. So rather than count cases, we try to estimate how many children are at risk. And by this, we mean how many children live very close, less than 50 kilometers from armed groups and forces that commit sexual violence against children. So here, the main trends that our report sheds light on would be the first one, that almost 10 times more children are at risk of sexual violence in conflict today than 30 years ago. 72 million children globally are at risk. It was at 8.5 million in 1990. Then the second trend, also very worrisome, is that in recent years, a bigger share of armed groups and forces that perpetrate sexual violence in conflict also target children. In the last 7 years, we see really a bigger proportion. So what we are witnessing is a brutalization of war. The third point, the countries where children face the biggest risk are, according to the most recent data available, Colombia, Iraq, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. But the data varies a lot from year to year. So if we take a step back and look at the data for 2018, DRC is among the 5 countries on the top of this depressing statistic. Now, another trend. Research shows that non-state armed groups that recruit children are more likely to commit sexual violence. They actually use it as a socialization method to strengthen group cohesion. And state forces perpetrate sexual violence against children as well, and increasingly so. And CAC data, UN data, shows that the atrocities committed by state forces almost doubled between 2018 and 2019. My fifth point, girls are disproportionately affected. No doubt about it, especially the adolescent girls, but boys are targeted too. And we also stress in the report that non-conforming sexual orientation may place a child at a greater risk of sexual violence and conflict, and so may disability. And my last point, lasting impact. Child survivors, children who survive, suffer with a variety of physical, psychological, social, and economic consequences, and these may persist for decades. Serious physical injuries, particularly severe for children as their bodies are not fully developed, but also long-term psychological consequences, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, shame, loss of trust, self-blame, many more. Lotte has also referred to them already at the very beginning. Let me quote a poem by Rahim, who was kept as a sex slave in DRC by the rebels when she was only 10 years old. I smelled fresh blood. I saw dead bodies. I ate leftovers. I remember everything. Sexual violence can destroy families, communities, and entire societies, and it even threatens the prospects of sustainable peace. So it needs to stop now.
We can see now the image clear, I think, holistic image for what these children are facing. And maybe I saw some of these cases from the 2 refugees camp here in Jordan, the Azraq refugees camp and the Zaatri, and there is a lot of cases that we face in this manner. So, and I have another question for you. What can be done better prevent and respond to sexual violence against children in this conflict? I think we need major efforts.
Exactly, and let me just sketch 3 main efforts or avenues. And we really ask both, world leaders, donors, members of the UN, and NGOs like us to do that. So there are three things we need to do in parallel. And the first one being that we really need to boost programs that meet children's specific needs. Also the frontline capacity across health, protection, education services. Let us really put children at the very center of international action against sexual violence and conflict. We need, on one hand, tailored and target prevention efforts. And here I mean including, greater work with armed actors really, but also tackling gender inequality, tackling root causes. And on the other hand, well, comprehensive child-centered services that consider their age, their development stage, gender, sexual orientation, disability. The few services out there are still mainly designed for adult survivors. And we need to substantially increase investment in prevention, mitigation, and response. This point has been made here clearly. Our own analysis shows that funding for gender-based violence programs for children represents a mere 0.12% of the total humanitarian aid per year. We have analyzed a period of 8 years there. So please increase flexible and long-term funding and equitably prioritize gender-responsive child protection, gender-based violence services, which are child-friendly and specialized, cross-sectorial and multi-layered mental health and psychosocial support, again, echoing Denmark here, and sexual and reproductive health services for survivors, of course. And another point I would like to echo from the predecessors here on the panel, more funds should be channeled directly to local women-led and women's rights organizations. Then the second big thing we need to do, I'm just going to briefly talk about it, it's to end impunity. Rape and other forms of sexual violence are prohibited by most national laws, international human rights law, the international humanitarian law, and still they are rarely prosecuted. And this problem is particularly acute in the case of children. And my last point, strengthen and better coordinate the collection of data. We need to really get our reporting right. This must be done in accordance with survivor-centered and child-friendly monitoring, reporting, and verification protocols. It needs to be safe. And it's really great to see that there's already more cooperation going on in this field. This is the way to go. And we owe it to the survivors. Thank you.
Thank you for this great answer, and we would like to say that saving children and protecting them is the main base, because they will be the next generation, and starting from the roots is great for sustainable great communities. Also, we would like to mention that you will have a lot also of questions and comments from the audience in the Q&A session. Thank you, Ms. Eva. I'm very pleased that we have a specific focus on DRC in the panel event today, where women's groups, national NGOs, and international partners have been collaborating to address GBV, including through the DRC INGO Forum. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Edwin Carrera from Sofisbadi in Democratic Republic of Congo. Edwin will be speaking in French today, so can take the opportunity to remind everyone to locate the interpretation button if you would like to listen her comments in English, Arabic, or Spanish. Ms. Edwin.
Apologies, Hala, just an update. We're having some technical difficulties. So Emanuela Salama is going to speak first.
Okay.
If you would like to ask the questions to Emanuela.
Sure.
Thank you.
We will introducing now Ms. Emanuela Salama, Nyalwini, GME, Democratic Republic of Congo. Emanuela also will be speaking in English. I will ask her the question in English. Now, welcome, Emanuela. How are adolescent girls and young women affected by gender-based violence in the DRC?
Apologies, technical support. Could we promote the user Josephine to speak, please?
It's been done.
Colleagues from Sofapadi, please go ahead. I think in the interest of time, Hala, perhaps we can talk about some of the work and the observations that are being brought from the colleagues from DRC while they are battling these internet challenges. I see Josephine is now trying to come online. Josephine?
Ok, bonjour, je suis Manila Salama de la RDC.
Bonjour, Emanuela. I'll pass back over to Hala to ask you the first question. Thank you.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Ouais, vous dites?
Ask the question again.
Yes, please.
Okay. Miss Emanuela, you are so welcome. And the question is, how are adolescent girls and young women affected by gender-based violence in the DRC?
Ok, merci beaucoup. J'avais dit que je suis Manila. Ok, je vais présenter d'abord par rapport à la première question. Exactement, je vais dire que le VBG qui subissent les jeunes filles en RDC sont d'abord le mariage forcé et précoce. Ce sont des fléaux qui sont d'abord suite aux cultures et aux coutumes surtout. Et ces deux problèmes causent souvent, est causé par la situation de guerre. Et c'est ce qui amène trop de filles dans la République démocratique du Congo à se prostituer et à avoir des mariages précoces forcés. En plus, c'est ça leur consentement. Et autre chose, je veux dire que le viol aussi touche les jeunes filles en RDC à 60%. Vous savez bien, parmi les États qui sont par état de siège en Ituri aussi. Et c'est ce qui font à ce que les filles sont vraiment victimes de ces violences sexuelles-là. En plus, souvent même, les filles ne sont pas alphabétisées, surtout au village. Vous allez trouver au village, les filles se limitent seulement à 6e année de primaire et elles n'ont pas vraiment de bagage intellectuel. Et quand ça se concerne toujours ici en RDC, dans notre province de l'Ituri. Il y a aussi plusieurs zones minières qui sont ici et il y a vraiment l'exploitation sexuelle et économique de jeunes filles. Et c'est ce qui cause trop le VBG dans notre jeune province et la République démocratique du Congo. Et quant à ce qui concerne la deuxième question, nous allons dire que d'une manière générale, la grande barrière, c'est d'abord l'insécurité en RDC. Et en plus, les structures de jeunes sont vraiment motivées à sensibiliser par rapport à VBG. Et les structures là sensibilisent trop à partenariat, surtout avec des organisations humanitaires telles que la Sofipadi a toujours été là pour appuyer, pour former les structures de jeunes. Mais les problèmes qui sont là, c'est aussi manque de financement par ces jeunes. Non renforcement des capacités, parce que pour former le jeune, il faut qu'il y ait vraiment la capacité intellectuelle et autres. En plus, on n'accorde pas trop aux jeunes les portages. Par exemple, ils veulent faire des activités, il n'y a pas trop de portages à nous. C'est un peu ça, d'une manière globale, la situation de la RDC. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for addressing this briefly, and maybe we can also focus on education for girls, because education is a main basic block to protect them. And Joey, do we need still to ask the second question? I think she answered it already.
Yeah, I believe it was answered. So if you want to move through Hala to the next speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Emanuela, again for joining us. So we're focusing on the challenges in this area. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Tyne Mort-Smith, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Norway to the UN and other international organizations in Geneva.
Thank you so much, Ala, for giving me the floor and for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel. I believe you have some questions for me.
Yeah, sure. The first question is that you are Norway is currently a member of the UN Security Council, and you play a critical role on the agenda of children and armed conflict in this month. What role do you think the UNSC can play to promote prevention and response to GBV and conflict, and also to promote accountability for violations?
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that question. And this year we mark the 25th anniversary of the UN mandate on children and armed conflict. And as a current member of the Security Council, as you referred to, Norway aims to make child protection a cross-cutting issue on the Council's agenda. And we are committed to ensuring that the UN mandate on children and armed conflict remains robust also for the next 25 years. But still, the Secretary General's annual report on children and armed conflict shows very clearly how children bear the brunt of brutality in war. And the annual debate on the basis of this report will take place a week from now in the Security Council. And Norway, as a chair of the Security Council's working group on children and armed conflict, has taken on a particular responsibility for this issue. So we consider the annual debate an opportunity to ground the issue of protection of children in conflict within the wider Security Council agenda. And one of our main objectives is to ensure that the UN country and reporting teams have sufficient resources to discover and verify abuses against children. And we know that the pandemic has severely worsened the risk and protection needs of children in conflict, and that children are more vulnerable and more exposed to recruitment and use by armed forces. And let me take this opportunity to commend Save the Children for producing, and as Eva just introduced to us, the very first analysis of the risk of sexual violence against children living in conflicts in the time span between 1990 and 2019. We know that rape and sexual violence can be particularly different to verify and is characterized by underreporting. So we don't have the data, and this report gives us an excellent opportunity to work from a basis of knowledge. So we need this type of level-headed report that was launched this February to bring the topic not just to the Security Council, but also to the global humanitarian and peace-building agenda. And Norway facilitating a briefing on the report and on sexual violence against children in conflict for Security Council members in New York last month. So we are following up on the report. And as was also mentioned by Eva, the report underlines the scale, the gravity, and the urgency of addressing sexual violence against children in armed conflict. The responsibility to ensure children are safe from harm rests with us donors, on the UN, on states, on the humanitarian community, researchers, and on civil society. So on all of us present here, in fact. So this is how we see our approach into the Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe we're having the right reports or data will help for a great start. And in your opinion, what can donor countries such as Norway do to better support prevention and response to GBV in humanitarian context?
Thank you so much for that question. As a humanitarian donor, Norway has taken due note of the recommendations to boost services and programs that meet children's special needs, and to end the impunity of sexual violence against children by strengthening and enforcing laws and of holding perpetrators to account. And at the Oslo conference that we saw some videos from in the beginning today, Norway pledged to earmark funding especially for SGBV. And we are following up on our pledge in partnership with UN agencies and international organizations. UNFPA is a major partner. And in all our conversations with OCHA, we emphasize the need to secure funding for protection and SGBV as part of the humanitarian response plans. We heard Mike Lowcock also in the beginning on that issue. And we are very encouraged that OCHA has set targets for allocations to country-based pool funds in their response plans, and for women-led organizations as part of their GBV support, which we think is absolutely crucial. As donors, we see it as our responsibility to engage our partner organizations and their local partners on protections issues in general, and on sexual violence against children in particular. So we think we need to discuss very concrete actions to take, and we must be willing to address the perpetrators who use sexual violence as a weapon in conflict, whether they are non-state armed groups, military forces, or peacekeepers. The Save the Children report is very clear about which countries children are at the greatest risk of sexual violence, and that non-state armed groups which recruit children are more likely to commit sexual violence. Norway provides this, as a consequence of this, Norway provides financial support to organizations like Geneva Call, who engage directly with armed non-state groups and seeks to commit them to standards of humanitarian norms and principles and protection of civilians. And another thing that Norway has worked extensively on in the last 6 years is the Safe Schools Declaration, because we see that as one entry point for such a dialogue. And the Safe Schools Declaration focuses on the role of schools as no-go areas for military groups or forces, and advocates for the right for children to a safe space and to education. The declaration has become a strong normative and protective instrument in the 6 years since it was signed, and we are now happy to see that it's now endorsed by 109 states. So we're very happy about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. March. Thank you. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Adam Wasorno, Chief Response Support Branch Coordination Division, OCHA.
Hi, Hala. Thank you very much. I also believe you have some questions for me.
Yes. The first question that we've heard a lot of from GBV specialists so far, but can you tell us, as the coordination lead within the humanitarian system, what can OCHA do to better prioritize GBV across humanitarian response, especially in the development of humanitarian response plans?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for having OCHA on this very important panel and this extremely deep and important discussion. I'd like to start by highlighting the importance of collective action to address gender-based violence. As we've heard from all previous speakers, GBV is often exacerbated in humanitarian crises all over the globe today. We have seen this particularly in the ongoing emergency in Tigray in Ethiopia, where we are seeing a pattern of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Many other countries that have been highlighted, especially by our colleague who wrote and spoke to the report. This past year, the global COVID-19 pandemic has significantly increased GBV risks, again, have been aforementioned, ranging from loss of livelihoods, income, decreased educational opportunities, increase in domestic care burdens, and an increase in intimate partner violence, risk of early and forced marriages, as we heard from our colleague in DRC, a spike in female genital mutilations, and other forms of gender-based violence. I would like to stress that the call to action on protection from GBV is a collective effort that we are proud to be a part of, as it represents the collective action by member states, donors, including key donors around the table today, Norway and Denmark, the UN, NGOs, civil society, a collective action to end violence. Hala, thanks for your question on the particular points related to the HRP. Let me highlight the ERC and OCHA's commitment to strengthen gender-based violence response throughout humanitarian planning processes. Firstly, we are in the process of, with our partners, the cluster system, strengthening data collection and analysis to give focus on affected people, including the most marginalized women and girls, boys as well, those with disabilities, victims and survivors of violence. Secondly, by making more visible the funding requirements and gaps for GBV through strengthened funding, tracking and reporting on FTS, as other colleagues have also mentioned on the panel here today, and by increasing funding through our pooled fund mechanisms, again, as Her Excellency just mentioned on the donor commitments and as well as our commitments as the IASC system and as OCHA through the ERC. Maybe some figures which help make the case. In 2020, 9% of SURF-funded projects had GBV as their main objective, and 62% of SURF funded projects included a GBV component. 2/3 of the 764 million distributed by country-based pool funds contributed to gender equality, as in countries such as Afghanistan, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan. Funding for GBV has been earmarked in the SURF underfunded window, leading to a total of 22.5 million for GBV-related programming, largely overreaching the initial target of 5.5 million. In addition, SURF provided 25 million to our UN colleagues, sister agencies, UN Women and UNFPA, to address GBV, with 30% of funding intended to support local women's organizations, a point stressed again by previous speakers. In Sudan, maybe a quick example, the country-based pool fund since 2016 has provided a total of $1.2 million to women-led national NGOs, which went towards case management, psychosocial support, counseling for more than 10,000 GBV survivors. Just the stark number alone from 2016 to date, 10,000 GBV survivors. And as the report said, our colleague mentioned, many are not reported. So it's just the stark numbers are quite heart-wrenching. Activities have included dissemination of information related to GBV, awareness raising on social issues. We talked about stigma. We heard the UNFPA and the UNICEF executive directors talking about this. We should not stigmatize women. The facilitation of recreational activities and construction of women's centers. We also have another example from Afghanistan, where we supported $250,000 to a national NGO to implement GBV activities. As OCHA, and thanks to our colleagues, April and her team, with consultations widely, as well as our leadership, we have updated our gender policy and highlighted GBV as a priority, with the intention to strengthen the focus on GBV and humanitarian response. Despite the collective ongoing efforts of the humanitarian community, and we've heard it over and over again, and the collective commitments we made, as referred by previous speakers also 2 years ago in the Oslo Conference on Ending Sexual and Gender-Based Violence in Humanitarian Crises, more needs to be done to prioritize the response, mitigation and prevention of GBV in humanitarian settings. I call on all member states to continue to prioritize the response, as they have to continue to do so, mitigate and prevent GBV in humanitarian settings as best as possible, and increase resource and funding to ensure survivors get the support they need. Again, we don't say this lightly, because a lot has been done, and we've got donor champions around the room today, and also other key donors who continue to facilitate and support. However, as of today, funding for GBV, and again, our colleague said it earlier, stands at 7.1% of the requirements. We need to work with member states on national legal frameworks to strengthen them, and also address the root causes of gender inequality. We need to tackle them, address those root causes to prevent gender-based violence from occurring in the first place. We must address the chronic underfunding of GBV services, including clinical management of rape, counseling services, and the range of medical, legal, and psychosocial support services that are critical to safety, dignity, and the well-being of survivors. This is only possible where we have the collective effort, as well as, of course, adequate funding. We are doing things differently through the HRP process by prioritizing GBV. The Emergency Relief Coordinator has made this request to humanitarian coordinators on the ground, to OCHA heads of offices, to make sure GBV is at the center of their thinking in funding decisions. And this is something that is critical to the wider response. We've also made it a priority consideration in all operations. This collective effort, agencies and clusters need to prioritize GBV, scale up GBV expertise, and ensure they are available in sudden onset emergencies and protracted crises as well. Having this expertise early in a crisis will help prioritize and give technical guidance to all humanitarian actors. I'll stop here for the first question. Thanks.
Thank you, Alet, and here we go. We're focusing on collective efforts for sure. And now the second question is, from your experience as a humanitarian leader in the field, heading OCHA in Nigeria, what do you think humanitarian leaders such as UN representatives based at country level can and should to do a better address to GBV?
Thank you. I think, first of all, we should acknowledge and recognize that we can all lead at different levels. My first encounter with, as a practitioner with GBV survivors was in Darfur in 2004. And I have to say, till today, I am I am touched and you know, affected by the traumatic stories I heard, you know, all those years ago from GBV survivors all the way through today. We at every single level of humanitarian response have to be leaders and fight this very, very important cause. I'd like to reinforce the message that humanitarian leaders continue to play a role and must advocate for you know, bring the issues to the table, what I call from the checkpoint, when you're negotiating access at the checkpoint and hearing what has happened to women, men, children, to the Security Council. How do we ensure that we amplify the voices of women to call attention for accountability, policy, and legal reforms? I'd like to say that, you know, leadership from non-GBV actors is also instrumental in prioritizing the broader gender issues, such as empowerment of local women and their leadership in decision-making to address issues of GBV. I'd like to really emphasize that the leadership level under the leadership of the ERC, as well as the executive directors on the IASC level, prioritization of the 4 non-negotiables, as we're calling it, protection, GBV, accountability to affected people, and prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as the localization agenda, are intrinsically linked and provide a cross-fertilizing framework to develop innovative and holistic approaches. Let me end, Halaba and panelists and our colleagues around the globe today by highlighting what others have said and my own experiences in Somalia leading the operation 2013-15 and I think till today, as well as Nigeria, where I was in 2018 to 2020. We must empower the local organizations, particularly women leaders. In Nigeria and Borno State, I realized that the civil society consortium was male-dominated in terms of the speakers, but I got to know the women, lawyers, doctors, midwives, and my colleagues and I in Maiduguri, under the blessing and, you know, sort of with the key UN actors on this particular topic, agreed to set up a women-led consortia to deal with women issues. 80% of the needs in Nigeria were women and children. Boys and girls, 80% of the need. And therefore, who better to advocate, to know, to stand and to argue and to make the case, who better to do that than the women of Borno State? So this is something that I'm very proud that we're able to achieve. And I would end also by saying that collectively we can do better. One, empower the local communities, because when we come and we go, I'm in Geneva today, I was in Nigeria for 2 years. When we leave, they are there. Before we got there, they are there. A lot has to be done to address, to empower them. Not only did we set up a female women's group and a consortia, but we also had 1 or 2 of them sitting in every single mechanism. Sorry, excuse me. When it comes to the CBPF, the Nigerian Humanitarian Fund, we had a friend, Fatima, who was a lawyer from Borno State, who was the co-chair of this consortia, representing and being the voice in the advisory group, which was championed and sort of embraced by everybody. We need to collectively do what we can to address this really, really harrowing stories of what happens to women and children and boys and elderly people in conflict settings. Thank you so much for this intervention as well. Thanks, Hala. Over to you.
Thank you a lot, Mr. Adam. So speaking of local women's organizations, we can now hear from Ms. Edwin. You're here with us again. Ms. Edwin Carrera from Sophie Paddy in Bunia, Little Leisure in DRC.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Moi, c'est Edwin Kirere de Bunia, qui travaille avec la Sophie Paddy. Et pour ajouter un peu à ce que Madame Emmanuela a dit, la plupart des fois, les femmes, les filles, elles connaissent présentement des problèmes d'accès, si je peux dire d'accès à l'éducation. Je parle d'une manière générale en RDC, mais plus particulièrement en République démocratique du Congo, qui est maintenant il y a beaucoup plus de conflits en République démocratique du Congo, à Djougou, à Irumu, et ces filles n'étudient pas. Et c'est laisse qu'elles sont majoritaires dans les sites des déplacés et elles s'adonnent au sexe de survie. Et d'autres problèmes qu'il y a est que les filles, elles sont utilisées, elles sont sexuellement abusées dans des sites minières, et nous ne pouvons pas ignorer que en République démocratique du Congo, que ce soit dans tous les territoires, Mambasa, Irumu, Aru, en province de l'Ituri, il y a des sites miniers où les filles sont sexuellement abusées et elles sont utilisées pour attirer des clientes. Et aussi, si je peux ajouter, elles ne sont pas autonomisées, et si elles deviennent filles-mères, elles sont abandonnées et les parents ne veulent plus supporter leurs études juste pour la seule raison qu'elles ont eu des enfants. Et dans la majorité des cas, ces filles, elles sont vraiment délaissées à elles-mêmes. Alors, par rapport aussi aux jeunes, je peux aussi dire que les jeunes n'ont pas cette possibilité d'avoir une bonne formation professionnelle. Ils n'ont pas accès à des espaces de prise de décision. Et que ça soit, surtout, ils n'ont pas part au financement. Les initiatives qui sont promis par les jeunes n'ont pas tellement part au financement. Les financements sont un peu calés, juste pris par certaines personnes ou peut-être par des organisations fantômes. On ne laisse pas la possibilité aux jeunes aussi d'accéder au financement. La plupart des cas, on ne laisse pas aussi la possibilité aux jeunes plutôt de parler, par exemple pour parler de paix, ou lorsqu'on est en train de discuter les questions de paix, les jeunes, si je peux dire, les opinions des jeunes ne sont pas tellement considérées. Ça, ce sont les défis que les jeunes sont en train d'avoir. Et malheureusement, cela laisse que c'est eux qui sont le plus utilisés dans les groupes armés et pour commettre des violations des droits humains. Et tout cela, pourquoi? Parce qu'ils sont négligés, ils ne sont pas, il n'y a pas vraiment des programmes qui s'intéressent vraiment à eux. Donc, si je peux essayer d'ajouter à ce qu'Emmanuela a dit, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Ms. Edwin. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Tyne Morse-Smith, Ambassador and Permanent Representative to the UN. No, we're done with Ms. Tyne, sorry. Thank you, Edem, and thank you, Ms. Edwin. Thank you, Ms. Tyne. Thank you, all of us, to all of your esteemed panelists, and for your remarks. We now turn to the Q&A to hear some of the questions, panelists. In the interest of time, I'll read out the questions in a group of 3 and ask you each respond. A reminder to all that Monique and Gratis will be responding in French, so please use the interpretation feature if you would like to listen them in another language. So the first question.
Yeah, maybe so I will support you, Ala, for the questions. The first question is, the biggest gap in the humanitarian response is access to justice and the economic reintegration of survivors. what are the key actions taken to address this? And maybe we can ask this question to our colleagues from UNFPA, to Monica Ferro.
Sorry, I was having problems with unmuting myself. Well, this question goes very much into what we've been referring on, providing a whole set of services that allow women not only to be treated and healed, but also to be empowered. And this is part of the comprehensive services that are provided in the clinics and in the safe spaces that we run with many partners who are sitting also here at the table. So I think that it has to be seen as a fundamental part of the work that's being done, not only to respond to the needs of the victims, but especially to empower them, not to re-victimize them, but to empower them into leading more fulfilled lives. And that would be one of my answers to that.
Thanks a lot, Monica. And we have a follow-up question also from John Ede. This question you just responded to was from Winnie Tishoborobo. And John is asking also, what practical step can we implement to improve GBV support and service provision? Monica, please.
Well, that was part of the part of what I tried to refer in the first question by saying that we have moved so far in what comes to responding to survivors, and especially in defining programming and coordination standards. There's the minimum standards for GBV programming, the coordination handbook, the GBV case management guidelines. So it's critical that we have that we take advantage of all this benchmark and build on the momentum that was created precisely by the standard setting resources. So we have the tools, we know what needs to be done, and this I mentioned 3 of the key documents that we have produced along with our partners. So we have the instruments to actually implement it, and the fact that they are built as guidelines, it's critical to allow a speedy implementation and a quick response, and also adaptation to what we are to what it's our end goal. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Monica. And we have questions for you, Eva. The first one is, how can we improve monitoring and reporting mechanism to better capture GBV and sexual violence against children, especially in the conflict setting? And a second question also you may wish to answer, Eva, is from Adrienne Foster. Impunity was also mentioned as a problem. It struck me that most of the GBV happen without consequences for the perpetrators. Mm-hmm. Do NGOs have a system to report violations systematically to the authorities? Mm-hmm. Eva, and maybe other panelists also would like to come in.
Okay, so just very briefly on the first question, how to better monitor and report. There are several steps that we are already taking, but they have to be strengthened. So the first one being, we need better access. And this is actually a very difficult point here under COVID-19. We are actually now having difficulty accessing. Then when we collect data, it really needs to be safe, right? We don't want to put survivors at additional risks. And if they are child survivors, the whole process of interviewing them has to be child friendly as well. Then cooperation with civil society. The monitoring systems in place for both the CAC agenda in the UN, but also the sexual violence and conflict agenda, they have their own monitoring systems that go down to the ground, and there they cooperate also with civil society. This needs to be further strengthened. Disaggregation, I actually mentioned this. We are improving, all of us, we are improving on gender and age. Disability is still, on the horizon. We need to really strengthen that. Then funding, without good funding, we will not be able to to move on this, and also the UN offices of both Special Representative on Children in Armed Conflict and Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. They need both financial and diplomatic support to be able to push it through. Then cooperation with researchers. You know, our report is done in cooperation with PRIO in Oslo, and I would really encourage more actors to also bring the researchers on and complement the UN data. And info sharing, more info sharing and synergies between different UN mechanisms. I'm really happy that UN Action Against Sexual Violence and Conflict is in place, and it's actually adopting more actors. Now there are already 20 UN agencies inside. There used to be 15. So yeah, it's moving, but there's a lot of work to be done. And then accountability, the second question. Actually here, yes, I said that it's not moving very fast, but we actually have some great steps in the last years. We have some historic convictions in the ICC. For instance, the newest conviction by Dominic Ongoen, it's the first case ever before the ICC to include charges of forced pregnancy and forced marriage. Then we also have, when it comes to accountability, Global Fund for Survivors of Sexual Violence and Conflict since 2019. This also comes after Oslo conference. So this is really great that it happened. You know, and the survivors, as it always has been mentioned here, need also the economic reparations. So this for now, but there's so much more to be said. You know, we have another publication on how to strengthen accountability for children. So I would also really recommend that one.
Many thanks, Eva. We are going to take a last question and then we'll move to the concluding remarks because in the interest of time, but all the questions are going to be, recorded, and the co-organizers will try also to answer to all these questions. They are extremely important. The last questions are for colleagues from DRC, so I'm going to speak in French. Emmanuela et Edwin, pouvez-vous nous dire quels sont les efforts de plaidoyer au niveau local qui ont un effet, qui fonctionnent et qui marchent? Et aussi, pouvez-vous nous dire, en tant qu'organisation locale, quel genre de soutien serait le plus adapté pour vous pour combattre la violence liée au genre dans les situations d'urgence? Ce sont les deux questions pour vous, Emmanuela et Edwin. Merci.
Ok, merci. Je ne sais pas si je peux déjà répondre.
Oui, allez-y.
Ok. Au niveau local, pour le moment, nous sommes en train de faire beaucoup de plaidoyers, surtout par rapport à la présence effective de l'État, parce que nous trouvons dans beaucoup de lieux ici en Ituri où il n'y a pas vraiment assez des éléments étatiques, et cela laisse qu'il puisse y avoir beaucoup de violences, et que le peu d'éléments qui sont là, par exemple, que ce soit de la PNC ou qui, ils sont carrément comme des petits rois, et ils font ce qu'ils veulent pour gérer peut-être ces cas de violences sexuelles. Maintenant, là, en Ituri, nous sommes en état de siège. Et pour le moment, nous sommes en train de voir ce que, bien que durant ces moments, il y a beaucoup des violences qui sont commises en état de siège par rapport, surtout avec les groupes militaires, ou que ce soit aussi les miliciens. Aussi, nous sommes en train aussi de faire des plaidoyers aussi par rapport au respect de la loi de violence sexuelle pour lutter contre l'impunité. Surtout aussi pour le bon fonctionnement des cours et tribunaux qui sont tellement éloignés des structures. Vous allez vous imaginer que dans une province comme Ituri, il y a une seule cour d'appel pour, je ne sais pas, plus de 47 000 km². Vous voyez, c'est tellement grand et des gens ne peuvent pas venir jusque là. Alors, pour ne pas aussi monopoliser la parole, c'est aussi ce qu'on peut faire pour nous appuyer, pour nous aider. La première des choses, je peux parler des renforcements des capacités. Le renforcement des capacités, premièrement, des acteurs qui sont là à la première ligne. Parce que tout le temps, nous sommes là, nous devons donner des réponses adéquates pour ces victimes des violences sexuelles. Et si nous sommes à chaque jour remis à niveau, ça va vraiment beaucoup aider. Et deuxièmement aussi, que nous puissions beaucoup travailler avec des jeunes. Tel que je le disais, la plupart des organisations qui sont dirigées par des jeunes où les initiatives des jeunes ne sont pas tellement financées. Si nous pouvons avoir des financements par rapport aux jeunes, à toutes les organisations des jeunes, ça sera aussi une bonne chose. Mais aussi avoir des projets à long terme. La plupart des projets qui sont mis en œuvre sur place, ce sont des projets à court terme qui viennent et ça passe vite et on ne sait pas on ne sait pas mesurer l'impact de cela. Et si nous avons des projets à long terme qui viendra s'installer petit à petit, parce que nous parlons des VBG et les VBG de foi ici chez nous, c'est aussi inclus dans la culture, dans la coutume, pour que ça puisse quitter des mentalités, ça demande du temps. Et si on a de plus en plus de projets de long terme qui sera là et qui va commencer à s'attaquer petit à petit à toutes les coutumes rétrogrades et ou à toutes ces habitudes qui viennent pour rétrograder la jeune fille. Et ces projets vont beaucoup plus aider parce que ça va donner du temps à la population, ça va donner du temps aux femmes, ça va donner du temps aux autorités de comprendre et d'être eux tous des agents de lutte contre les VBG. Je vous remercie.
S'il vous plaît, je voudrais intervenir aussi. Je suis Madame Noëlla.
Oui, allez-y, oui.
Oui, je suis Madame Noëlla de la Sofepadi. Je voudrais intervenir aussi par rapport aux violences basées sur les genres. Vous savez, ici, la collègue a plus focalisé l'accent sur les autorités. Moi, je reviens par rapport aux violences basées sur les genres. Je pense qu'il y a aussi un grand travail que nous sommes censés continuer avec les chefs coutumiers, puisque dans nos cultures, femmes ne sont pas vraiment impliquées, même dans les problèmes qui les concernent, que ce soit les mariages, parfois c'est déjà décidé au niveau de la famille. Alors je pense, avec le partenaire, si on peut aussi travailler et avec les jeunes et avec les chefs coutumiers pour qu'on arrive aussi à changer certaines choses qui sont dans nos communautés, qui sont ancrées là-bas. Puisque même quand il y a le cas pendant la période des conflits armés, souvent vous allez voir, on s'attaque toujours aux jeunes filles, toujours aux enfants. Et ça, je pense, si les chefs coutumiers eux-mêmes, on doit travailler avec eux pour qu'ils puissent arriver à changer un peu la mentalité des jeunes. Puisque ceux qui s'attaquent aux jeunes filles, ceux qui s'attaquent aux dames, ce ne sont que ces groupes armés et la plupart, ce sont les hommes. C'est ce que je voulais ajouter. Merci.
C'est moi qui vous remercie, madame, pour ces remarques très importantes.
S'il vous plaît.
Oui, on a beaucoup de questions, mais on doit redonner la parole à Ala qui va donner la parole pour les concluding remarks. Je suis désolé, mais nous avons des obligations de temps aussi.
D'accord, pas de problème.
Mais on reviendra vers vous parce que ce sont des questions très importantes. Ala, you have the floor for Handing over the floor then for the concluding remarks. Hala, please.
Thank you all for your highly important questions and very interesting responses. Thank you for all the panelists for this conversation. And we ensure that this conversation does not end with this event. And in order to better address these challenges, it is essential that we work together at all levels and have engagement of the target group, which is women and children in this manner for the GBV. Globally and locally, and engage all women and girls around the world. Finally, Mr. Andreas Papa Constantino, Director of Neighborhood and Middle East in the DG ECO, to the European Commission is now going to deliver some concluding remarks and present the role of the European Commission to prevent and respond to GBV in a humanitarian context. Mr. Andrea.
Thank you, Hala. I'm delighted to be here today. I would like to thank the organizers as well.
I think there is technical issues or the connection. Mr. Andrea, can you hear us?
Should be his connection because we can hear you clearly.
Can you please write him in the chat box?
I think I'm back. Sorry for this interruption. As well as thousands of children, particularly girls, are forced to drop out of school. And these are some of the challenges we are faced with. As the European Union, we are committed to preventing and responding to all types of violence, including, of course, gender-based violence. We have a range of tools at our disposal to fulfill this commitment. First, our relevant humanitarian policies on gender and protection, including child protection, our gender age marker. This means that all EU-funded humanitarian assistance should include gender age analysis, sex and age disaggregated data, adapted assistance to mitigate and prevent any negative effects and ensure the adequate participation of relevant age and gender groups. And on funding, it was raised by a number of panelists. For instance, during 2019 and 2020, we have allocated 56 million euros in humanitarian aid to prevent and respond to gender-based violence, and almost 45 million to reproductive health. So the current pandemic has yet again provided evidence that crises exacerbate structural gender inequalities, as I said earlier, with worrying increases in cases, as well as the severity of gender-based violence. This is why it is so important to further our essential humanitarian work as responding to violence with adaptations where needed, even if face-to-face contact is not always possible, certainly in these times of COVID. Over the past decade, we have come a long way. We have adopted relevant policies and approaches. We have increased our protection and gender staffing in the field and funded a large number of projects that prevent and respond to GBV. We have also renewed our commitments to the call to action on protection from gender-based violence in emergencies roadmap 2021-2025. And we are pleased to be working together with Denmark and all other partners on this important issue. I've seen a lot of support today to this call in a number of interventions during the event. Looking ahead, I see a number of areas that deserve our attention as well as our collective action. First, we need to ensure that all of our humanitarian actions are gender and age sensitive and mitigate GBV risks. We are on the right path. That's undeniable. but a lot remains to be done. We need to do more to make sure that gender mainstreaming and mitigation of GBV risks are really seen as the responsibility of the entire humanitarian community, irrespective of the sector one works in. Second, we must continue implementing our GBV commitments in the field. We need to continue delivering quality humanitarian responses to violence and provide services to survivors. GBV action needs to be seen as life-saving and essential, and to be addressed from the onset of a crisis. We need to further promote an intersectional approach, for instance, for women and girls with disabilities, adolescent girls, older women, as well as persons with diverse sexual orientations and gender identity, and ethnic and religious minorities. We must also work very closely with our development and peace actors to ensure longer-term approaches and solutions to GBV. Let me close by stressing that together with our partners, many of whom are present here today, by the way, and with the global humanitarian community, we must aim at and focus on keeping each other accountable. Our collective success is only measured by the real change in the lives of survivors of GBV and populations at risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Andrea, for your comments and for the commitment of the European Commission to prevent and respond to GBV in a humanitarian context. I would like to thank you all for attending this event and focusing on the collaboration of all of us to take the accountability in all of our actions and all of our projects on the sensitivity or these cases and targeted group for a cause to change and create improvement and development. We know that there is still a long way to go better to prevent and respond to GBV in humanitarian context. What we know is that we need to be united, we need to be coordinated to make progress, and we need to put national and local women's-led organizations at the center of prevention and response. Thank you all for your attendance. It was a pleasure to have you all. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thanks a lot.